If you're just starting now and you haven't seen part one, it's all going to seem rather awkward. So click up here, go to part one, and then come back and continue here. This carb has a few notable differences than the other one, all of them external. I'm going to loosen this bracket. I'm just going to deflect it so I can get the socket in there. You can see that there's more than enough room. That's just good enough to loosen it for now. I'm going to remove the top. We can see that this carburetor fared much better than the other one. There's no corruption in this one at all, no fouling. All of the brass looks very good. The rubber seems very good in here. I don't know how one got corrupted and not the other, but that's just the way it is. This carb is now completely broken down. I'm going to begin the cleaning phase. I'm not going to be removing this. I see no reason to. Nothing here is corrupted. General cleaning, and then I'm going to do a general cleaning on these parts. I'm going to do a reassembly. Carb has been blown out. This is finished, ready for reassembly. I just have a couple of parts to touch up, not nearly as bad as the other one. And this includes the inside of here that has some buildup. That's all. Hit that with some polish. You can see that right there. And the enricher needle right here could use a little bit of a cleaning. There we go, very nice. This will also get a little touch up. Everything cleaned up and oiled. Sometimes I forget the exact location of these tabs. I just look back at the movies or pictures that I took and put them back in the correct location, but I don't want them to get lost, so I put them somewhere. I'm adding this section into the video to alleviate any confusion here. The two tabs that hold the wire looms into position on this side, we could see one here is placed in down so it bends upward, and this one on this side is placed upward so it bends downward. These are the correct positions for these tabs. At this point, we're going to bring the carbs back together. I'm going to start by removing these parts that I temporarily put on here so they wouldn't get lost Start with this C-clip. Nylon bushing, spring. So those are now removed. Put a little bit of rem oil on this connection here on this side, as well as these surfaces in here, just a little bit, so it'll fit nice. These press in over here very easily. I'm going to put it on one of the carbs. I find the best way to do this is to remove the C-clip from the end of this piece right here. I'll do so now, and what this will allow is everything to be hooked up, and the teeth from this piece, the linkage, will connect back down easily over after everything is connected onto this one. I'll demonstrate as close as possible to the camera. It's in these teeth right here. So this one is in position. I'm going to slide this in, and that middle linkage, the nylon bushing popped up again. That's fine. I'll put that back in later. Make sure that linkage is out of the way. Putting the carburetors back together, I noticed that I had scrunched this here into the spring. It wasn't correctly assembled. This should be assembled without the spring in place, and then the spring should be pushed in under that notch as shown here. This is the correct way to install it. I have done so wrong during this assembly, and I've subsequently corrected it. Here's another shot that I wanted to take showing an installed carburetor with a spring set up for the balancing circuit, showing that spring with a little tiny notch on the top that holds the spring in place with the plate, and then finally the screw on the bottom lifting that plate into position. That spring provides the buffer from the top. As I bring that fuel connector in the back, this fuel connector, and line it up into those holes, that hose, that T-connector, I line that up as well. With everything held in position, I'm going to just loosely fit this bracket on so nothing falls apart, because there's nothing really holding it together. So I'm going to drop this nylon bushing in now, down here. Followed by that spring, and then the C-clip. And here's that piece down here reassembled. I'm going to screw in this bottom bracket. Take off this top bracket for a second just so I have room to work. Now that bottom bracket's on. What I have to do is pull the enricher out, slide this donut onto those forks, those teeth, and then slide it back into position. Right, so now it's out. Slide these onto it and let it slide back over that brass shaft. This is not the best implementation. So there we go. Now we can see that it is around that piece, that nylon piece, and it's now back over the shaft, so it's locked in a position. I need only put the C-clip back on over it. I now have the clip locked in position. As you can see way down here, it's all the way back there now. And if I hold everything together without the bracket, we can see that both enrichers engage perfectly, no binding. So I'm going to put the bracket back on. As I put on this bracket, I'm now putting the bracket that holds the enricher cable back on top of it. So I'm screwing everything down. Again, I really should get replacement screws like hex for this. There's going to come a time where I'm going to have to use vice grips to get these off. Okay, now everything is on. Let's try this again. That's perfect. No binding, no nothing. It's not the best implementation of this circuit. On the 1100, it's much easier to work with. Look at the idle screw. Idle screw set up fine. Look at these. These are real nice. Very good. Everything's looking real good. It looks like we're in a good position. I want to go over through a couple of electronic things before we put this back in the bike. So these solenoids right here that go to the bottom of the bowl, they're useless. They cost a fortune, and they do go bad, and they go bad from mechanical failure. I'll tell you right now that this one, the one in green, you can see that it's epoxied, It went bad because the connection broke right here. And what I ended up doing was digging out the rubber. There's a little tiny metal loop. I cut back some of the green wire, resoldered the connection, filled it with epoxy, and saved myself a couple $100. Right, and that happened just as we had gotten the bike. But I'll tell you that if you're interested to know if it's good, if it's got a good connection, we're looking at about 24 ohms plus 1 in the cable. We're looking at about 23 ohms. On this one, we'll probably see the same thing, or in and around the same thing on this one. Yeah, so this one's 22 ohms. So if you see an open on one of these before you go spending a lot of money, you'll know that there's a break that generally happens inside here. You can dig out all of this rubber material, fix it yourself, save a lot of cash, right? So there's tip number 1, and you can see it's been done. And we're going to move over really quickly to the throttle position sensor. So I'm seeing about 0.8K closed, and I slowly open it up. I see about 4.1K wide open throttle. And it's got, you know, good even deflection as I slowly close it. And that's what I'm seeing on my throttle position sensor, and that is on the middle pin and the pin closest towards me in this configuration, right? That's all I got as far as throttle position sensor today. I'm not trying to set it. Obviously, based on those values, you would set it to the book, loosen these, and move it till you got the desired value. Time to put this carb back in the bike. We're going to start off with the carburetor reinstallation by removing the paper towels that were put into these ports to stop contamination. I'm then going to apply some oil lightly to these rubber rings. This is going to make the carburetor installation easier. We could see these two cables from the solenoid. They're supposed to dangle on the opposite side. They fall right down. This air hose right here is supposed to fall down on this side, closer to me, as I bring the carburetor into position with the ports facing the rubber manifold that I just added the rem oil to. And I place it right on top of it flush. Would look just like that. I take one last quick look. I make sure that these clamps, that little notch, there's a little notch in the rubber and the clamp to hold them in the correct position, and make sure that they are locked appropriately in that position. And once I'm sure that they are, ensure that there is enough slack on the clamps, not too much, just enough. Then I can take these carbs and just work them back and forth while pushing down into that manifold. I find it's easier to straddle the bike to do this. There, just like that, they both popped right in. Really easy. This, of course, is going to require a visual inspection from both sides to ensure that the carbs are seated flush into this manifold. We could see from this side, and you could give a little wiggle, right? Because it's rubber. We can see that it's perfectly seated. It's not bent in any way. Everything looks okay. We'll look around the other side now. Come off the tripod to show the other side, but we can see on the other side it is also fully seated as well. No obstructions, it's not deformed in any way. We're ready to tighten down now these screws. There is a spacer on this setup here, on this clamp, that allows it to not be tightened past a certain point, and it can easily be destroyed if you over tighten. So once you feel resistance, you just give it a little nudge and then you stop. Once this is secured, this hose is pulled back forward in this direction. There is a slot for it through this shielding material here. So they come under that material, and it'll connect on the other side to this port down here. Reconnect the fuel line to the carbs. Then we'll route our solenoid connections back up the frame, one by one. Lock them back into this wire holder. I don't like anything taut. I like to leave a little bit of slack. So I just pull back a little bit of slack after I lock them down. The connectors up top will now be reconnected to their respective locations on the harness. I'm going to be reintroducing the two linkages next. We're going to be going around to the other side of the bike to put in these portions first. Start by dropping the bottom one through that notch and then around the track. So I got it halfway in the notch. I'll roll it up till it falls into the track. Now it's through that notch, and then let it sit in that track. So we can see it in position, just sort of laying there, but still hanging on the other side. Now we're going to put it in the bracket. On this side, ensuring that it's in that track, we get it into the two teeth of that bracket. We sort of pull back on it so there's no slack, and then we could turn this, tighten this down, and that's just fine, just so it doesn't fall out. We just hand tighten this. Move on to the next one. Next one is the same procedure, but from overhead. I slide it in the side and bring it forward till it falls in that notch. Lay it back into the track. We'll go around the other side to see me bring it in position in that bracket. Here now on the other side. Falls into place. This one I hold up and tighten that screw in the front. Just finger tighten it so it doesn't move. You can see the throttle's working. I'm now ready to tighten it. This is going to be 10 mil. I'm going to do one at a time. I'm going to hold the cable into the ideal position the way it's pointed up. I don't want the cable to move. I just want to snug it, that's all. That's good. This one, I'm going to come around back here, do the same thing, hold the cable in a position, just snug it down. There we go. These are done. Free play, snaps back nicely. No binding, that's what we're looking for. Gonna put a small amount of lubricant on this pipe right here. Then I'm going to reattach this hose that came down from that carburetor to that pipe. Now I'm gonna straighten out the heat shield. Reconnect this cable for the throttle position sensor. These electrical connections from this harness will be wrapped back around to the carburetor. I plug in the connections on this rear carb. And then bring these over for connection to the other side. Now connect this brown wire right here to this side, and then this black wire, there's a connector back there. I'm gonna sneak this one past the cable around and in. There it is. I'll tighten up these cable holders. And the one in the back up here. And connections for the carb are now completed. Now I'll be reintroducing the choke. I'll be putting the cable through here first and sliding it back like that, and then it will go under this bracket. It'll seat right at the end. There's a stop. I'm going to pull back some of this cable from the carb, some of that slack, and make sure it's not touching the choke cable. Okay, I have a funnel here that I've got tied off to the frame. It's going directly into the fuel filter. I'm going to fill this with a little bit of gasoline, and then I'm going to prime the system and let the bowls fill up. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to check for leaks. I'm going to check to see that the carbs themselves aren't flooding and that everything is okay. I think we've reached a point where it finally filled up the bowls and the system. Put a little more in. There we go. It's not pulling any more gas. I'll add a little bit more. Okay, so everything is now filled up. I'm going to take a look inside and make sure that nothing's flooded, that everything looks okay. I'm going to look at the bowls and inspect everything. Shut off the bike. Everything down here is dry. I don't see anything leaking from the bowls, from the seals, from anywhere down here. I don't see anything wet. This seems to be okay. Still have to look up top, make sure that the floats aren't stuck. We'll take a look and see that now. If the floats get stuck, they fill up with gasoline because there's nothing to stop it from pouring in. We open it up slightly to have an inspection, and everything in there is dry. No cause for concern there. Everything is dry in here. No cause for concern here. So everything looks good. Not just if a float is stuck, but also if the float needle is not making a good seal, or if that seal that the float needle sits in, that brass piece, is gone bad. That'll also cause the carb to flood, and we'll see gasoline appear here inside this portion of the carburetor. Make sure that the clamps on the air box are slackened and that the keys are in the position here, the correct locations. I'm going to put some rem oil on the inner portions of these rubber seals. There is a hose in the rear, this black hose that is going to just slide back onto the rear of the airbox, and there's a clamp that's going to slide up and clasp onto that hose. Connects on just like that. The airbox and the carbs aren't keyed. It simply sits flush over the carbs, and then once it's flush over the carbs, it locks down. Conduct a visual inspection and make sure that everything is seated properly. From this side, I can see that it's seated right on top of the carbs. I'll look around the other side now. On this side, I can also see it's seated well. Now I'm going to reinstall the air hose here that goes on the side of the air box. Make sure I have some slack on the bracket. Not too much, just a little. Now I'm going to connect the airbox as one unit. The bottom of the airbox does snap in. So you let this hose come around back. Bring it around back. Seat it in here. Snap it in. Now it's held secure. I could screw down this bracket. This airbox connection to the carburetor is not a wonderful design. It's not nearly as good as the 1100. It is important as you add each thing on, the side hose and the air filter, to check and recheck and make sure that it's still seated in the carb. Even with this tightened down, if you pull up really hard, you can rip this off. It's almost like the side hose and ultimately the air filter becomes a connector that also holds this down, as well as the two connections on the carb. With that, if you see it had lifted a little, loosen the screws slightly, nudge this back and forth to move it in position, and re-lock those screws down for a final time. So this is now a closed system. I could actually run this. If I try to run this with just the carbs, it would be way too lean. It simply wouldn't work on this bike. But now that it's a closed system for this jetting, it should operate. Let's slap the tank on right quick and see what she does. Put a little rem oil on these rubber holders up front here for the tank. Makes it easier to install. Lower this tank over to pull through the speedometer and electrical cables here right quick. They're through, and now I could properly, goes right on because of the pre-oiling. That's it. That was all it was. That quick. Hook up the fuel line to the tank. Just really quickly. There we go. Now we're going to put a little gas in here. We're not going to fill the whole tank up. We're testing. Just put a little gas, get the thing going. We'll see how we're doing. See if that does the trick. Open the garage so I stick around for future videos. We have full choke. Choke RPM looks good for full choke, just above 2,000. I'm going to bring it in one click. Going to bring it in another click. I have a good feeling I'm going to have to cut this short and add more gas during the testing. I'm going to continue the test of one click choke out. I'm just restarting the test because I felt I needed more gasoline. I didn't want it to go lean, so we're just going to restart right where we left off. I'm going to bring it in all the way now. Now there's no choke. Of course, I do need to set up the balance. Obviously, the bike is going to be brought to full temperature before I do any balancing. And we'll take a look at some throttle response here. Very light because it's not full temperature. So that's nice. There's also some old gas in the system that's running through the system right now, through the pump and whatever, that's working its way out. This is not running on the new gas yet. That's why I'm still letting it go through a bit. Could take as much as 5 minutes or more. So I'm going to come back. I'm going to give it some time. Good throttle response. Very nice. We'll let it cool down so we can finish the rest of the assembly, followed by the balancing. So I drop in the first of the 2 bolts securing the tank here on the lower portion, the 12 millimeter. Second bolt also holds in the choke. Put the console and speedometer back on. So plug in the electrical connections. Hook up the speedometer cable. A little bit of slack. Now pull the slack back down from the front of the bike, lifting up and grabbing the cable by the front tire, and pulling that slack back down, seating the unit. Drop in the 3 screws now. We'll give it a quick test, just make sure everything is working okay. Speedometer looks good. Slide in the seat. Rear bracket over the back of the seat. Install our rear seat under that bracket. Lastly, the nut over the stud. Secure it with 14 mil. That's it. The bike's fully reassembled. At this point, we're now going to set up our connections for vacuum and allow the bike to warm up. A quick glance of the lower portions of the manifolds shows 2 hose connections. The back one here we can see is capped off. The other one is used for the emission system. We're going to be using these 2 vacuum connections to do our balancing. I'm simply going to be pulling these hoses off one at a time from this manifold. And here we have the connections with the hoses removed. I like to pre-check the synchronizer before I begin, make sure everything's working. Look about good enough for me for this test. I've connected the hoses up for the gauges. A needle nose pliers will make a world of difference in trying to get these on there way back there. But that is now done. We're ready to warm up the bike. During these tests, you will notice popping in the exhaust because in order to conduct these tests, you had to remove the vacuum for the emissions, and that's perfectly fine. The screw tweaks very small increments, obviously, to get that just right. And when you adjust a screw, you gotta blip the throttle. You just can't take the numbers that change on face value. Give it a little gas, let go, let it fall back into position, see where you're at, make the adjustment again, and do that little back and forth. Eventually you get it right on the money. You want it to go through that whole process, rev it up a little, let it drop down. You don't have to go full tilt. Rev it up a little, let it fall back down, see where it lands, make sure that they're even in uniform. Also shows that everything is operating correctly. I'm going to push down this insulation material as to expose the screw back there, the balance screw, if I could get it to focus. There, right there, the balance screw. We're not going to make any adjustments until the bike is off the choke and fully warmed up. As I come off choke and the idle comes down, I can start to see disparaging differences. It heats up. So I'm going to attempt to capture this on video as I turn the screw up here. I'm going to have the camera situated on this. Wrong way. Far. You can hear the engine even out as I turn it. I do have delay in the line, so when I make these incremental turns, I do have to wait. Just a minor adjustment, more in order. Yeah, that's perfect. That's done. These hoses will now be detached, and I'll reconnect the other hose, put the cap on this one. Hoses are now back on, clamps are reattached, everything's secure. You can be sure that if you got gas rot, your tires are probably low, so check your tires before the test drive. We're also going to check the oil level too, which is okay. It's due for a change. That's for another video though. I'd like to tell you that I get to take the first test drive. That is not going to happen tonight. So the wife is going to report back on her findings. I'm going to test the bike out myself now. I'm going to stick a GoPro on my head so y'all can watch it too. I approve. So I hope you found this video on the rebuild of the carburetors and all of the tasks that it entailed enjoyable. I hope you found it informative. I hope it saved you a lot of money. I hope you learned something. Thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching. Would you like to reply?